Okay, so let's get started with Discovery Education. I was asked to present something on Discovery Education. I really was not very familiar with it, but I've looked at it, I've navigated around it. One thing I will say about it, it does have a lot of different kinds of materials, but it really will depend on what you're looking for. I'll also be quite honest. The navigation itself is a little bit awkward. I think the design is not necessarily intuitive, which is why I think that if you're going to use it, having someone having done some of the legwork before might be helpful to you. So I just want to tell you that to log on, probably the easiest way to log on is going to be for everybody to just sign in with Google. And so you'll sign in, of course, with your school account on Google, and that should take you right there. From there, we get to the main page. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that this main menu here is really the same as the drop-down menu here. There are a number of different areas. Trending is obviously new offerings. And then the other things we'll look at one by one, not every single one, but we'll look at some of them. Because I like to organize things first before I start going shopping, for example, what I would probably suggest doing is first going to Classroom. You can either go from here or you can go from this menu. So in Classroom, you'll be setting up your own classes. In order to do that, you'll go to All Classes, create a classroom. You'll name a classroom. What is today's date? Thursday classroom. You can put a description there, and then your classroom will appear, but it's really empty. You cannot populate automatically from PowerSchool, but all the students in the roster are here. So you would have to do it one by one. One of the middle school teachers told me that it's just something he does in the late summer with his new rosters. Of course, one thing that would be very helpful is to sort by all the students so you have fewer students to look through. And here we only have the ninth graders to look through. And then you'll add people and you'll save that. Probably the next thing to do, I wouldn't work anymore in this window, at this point would be to think about where you're going to put your content. So for that, because obviously when you find something, it's nice to have a place to put it in, I would go to My Content. There, I'll start creating a folder structure. I've set up some hypothetical classes. I'm not going to give instructions on how to create a folder, how to nest folders. I think everyone can easily figure all that out. And I don't really want to take your time to do that. But I've set up some, and if you look at them here, I've put some assessments there underneath. But what you might want to do is do it by unit or however is useful to you. At that point, we have a class in which we can assign work. We have folders in which we can place things as we find them. So I would go back to my main menu and think about ways of searching. Well, a very obvious way to search is by subject. And because someone had asked me specifically about art and English language arts, I thought I would look and see what they had in English language arts. You can see one of the first things here is that you can select by grade level. This is great. The only problem is, like in a lot of programs, that when you do some other action, it seems to flip off your grade level and you have to go back. But in any case here, I'm at ninth grade, 9 to 12, and let's say that I'm looking at literature. You'll find, as I did, that a lot of the sources here, a lot of the resources might be double booked, let's say, in different subject areas, and they might be applicable to English, but they might really be more about science or current events or something like that. As you can see, I have once again flipped off my proper grade level, so I've gone back to that. And at this point, it gives me a trending list, it gives me a new list, I tend not to look at these things. I'm kind of a power searcher myself. I really want to see things that are applicable to what I'm looking for. Well, I know that in ninth grade at a certain point they were looking at literary devices. So I'm going to click on that. Once again, it flipped off the right grade level, which for a person less patient and zen than myself might be hugely annoying, as is my internet speed that I'm paying who knows how much for, and I don't know why it's so slow today. I can just guess that, as Lisa says, we're on the road to breaking the internet. So that's one way to look. And if you want to look at one of the things that I found, one of them was I know that students are actually do study Animal Farm. So here's something about an allegory. There was something up here about literary devices, symbol and irony. And when I go to that, I'll find some lesson plan suggestions. I'll find a video, and once in a while there's something interactive they can do. Another really useful way of searching, and this I think especially for math and science, is by standard. Now you're really the experts on these subject area standards more than I am. You have Common Core standards, you have the NGSS standards. So what I looked at was the NGSS standards arranged by topic. And then because I'm thinking of a lot of the students who come into the library, notice what it did again. Oh, I have to go back and choose my grade. But this is really kind of nice because since people are using the NGSS standards and moving into them now, you'll probably be very aware of exactly what standard you're on. And I saw some students doing something about inherited traits one day. So I went down to that inheritance and variation of traits, and I'm looking at statistics and probability to explain the variation and distribution of blah, blah, blah. Now when I get here, I can look at all my results. I can either look at them in a list view or a grid view. Sometimes I like lists better just because it's easier to see more at the same time. Now at this point, I would obviously look at things, open them up, and I have a drop-down menu here. Let's see if I happen to go to alleles, genotype, and phenotype. Very often these particular units are broken up into different segments. So that's one of the tabs here. And I see that this has 7 videos, 7 segments. And as I go to each one, for example, the test cross, I get more actions. And we can talk about what those things do because those actions are really pretty much replicated up here under the main unit actions. Add to quick list, that's pretty obvious. It's going to save it. It's kind of like a copy paste thing. I think that quick list will go away when you log out. Create with Studio. I'm not going to talk about Studio today, but basically Studio is kind of a smartboard whiteboard. And on it, you can place text, you can place instructions, and you can just pile all the resources up that you want. You can create a whole project out of it. And then you could assign all that work to students at the same time. Share gives you normal sharing options. Assign, that's if you're actually ready to assign it to a class, which is why it doesn't really make sense to use assign until you've set up a class. And then add to my content, we know where that's all going to go. As we can see, you can choose your drop-down folders and choose where you want it to go. From this point, I think I would move possibly right into assigning something. I can assign right from here. I would probably compile all my work first, as I said. I would put it in my content because you might find things that are applicable to different classes while you're looking for one. And at that point, go to your folder and you can choose something, this test cross, and at that point you assign it. You can't assign from inside a class. You can really only assign things from the resource itself, which I think is a little bit of a failing. I would prefer you to be able to assign from right in a class, maybe access your content from there, but you can't. And that's one of the things I'm talking about when I say that the navigation is maybe a little bit quirky sometimes. So because my students are very high achievers, I assign it today and it's due tomorrow. And at that point, I select my class. I'll put it into the one that I actually have students, and it may tell me that it's already assigned there. Oh, and by the way, when I assigned it, I probably went too fast. There was a choice there. I don't think it will allow me to go back. Not really. This is another very quirky thing. I find that sometimes when you're in one window in this program, going back doesn't really take you right back. It may take you back to a beginning, which means you have to kind of start over. So when I selected a class, all students are selected. If I wanted to do this as catch-up work for just some students, they would all show up in the roster here. This is my actually high-performing student. Her name is 2022 test, and I would assign it to her, or I could, as I said, assign it to everyone in the class. So now that that work is assigned, we're going to move on with how you would handle the work once you're in the classroom. For that, we'll go back to Classroom. And it takes you right to the assignment. So I have a list of all my assignments there, which is fine. I would have chosen to have it take me to all my classrooms, but that's fine. At this point, you can click in your classroom and that will just take you to the roster. It's not really useful for much else. See, that's a very small roster. I'm only showing this one because I have real student names in the other playgrounds that I've created. You can choose to view the details of the class. And that's really pretty much the same as just clicking on the class. You can duplicate the class, which I'm not quite sure you would do. Maybe someone can think of a reason for that. But in any case, really, down here in my classrooms, you're just managing students. You're not really doing anything with their work. You would have to go to assignments. And at that point, you would be able to see everything that you'd assigned, and it tells you what class you assigned it to. And then you can see who turned in what, if students have accessed it. Right here it says the status, meaning if they've clicked on it, it should say started. The results, that may be if it had been a test or something that actually had scored results, and whether or not they submitted it. Some of the simulations have a submit button on them, I think. Certainly an assignment that you create will have a submit button. Here you can edit the date. You can unassign if you want to unassign it to a specific student. And this is kind of interesting because you can see what the student sees. So I'm signing on as 2022 student. You see there's my username up there. And I can see all the assignments that show up for that person and what they did with them. It's useful to have a student view. Interestingly, the back button will not take you out of that. It keeps giving you an error. So the way to get out of it is to quit impersonation. You didn't know you were impersonating a student. If you want to look at a student's work across the board, let's say, across all the assignments that have been set up, then you can go to Student Reports up here, and you can see everything that has happened with these students. You can click on the student, and you can get a list of all their assignments, as opposed to just seeing the assignments one by one. That really is the basics of how you handle searching, getting assignments into classrooms, and then checking on that work. There are a few other options here. One is instructional strategies. If you're interested in that teacher stuff, please look at that. Professional learning also has a lot of teacher materials. I didn't mention the most obvious way to search, which should be pretty clear. You can just search in the search box. And also when you find something, if you want to filter, let's say that I'm teaching a unit on, give me an idea, I think I'm learning electricity. At this point, I can filter on the left. I don't know how useful, honestly. I see all the filters on the left. If it turns out that I really love one publisher, I like their products better than another, I could do that. I could choose the kind of material. I couldn't choose the subject area, but these are really very close. Physical science, history and nature of science, there's kind of a big overlap there. Reading levels by Lexile scores, that might be useful, although you'll notice that everything here seems to be in the same area. So that's really all I had to say about this. I think that next I just want to look for a few minutes at, well, actually, let's have questions first about this. If anyone has questions, I'm not sure that I can answer them. And then anyone who isn't interested in science can sign off, and I'll just very quickly show science in context to anybody in science that's interested.